You're listening to Through the Square Window with me, Samira Ahmed.
And me, Graham Kibble-White.
This is a podcast guiding you through the UK television we watched in decades gone by.
And whether you remember it or are baffled by our TV past will be your archaeological guides as we unearth some relics and see how they connect to the present.
I'm a cultural journalist. I present Front Row on Radio 4. I grew up loving TV in the 70s, 80s and 90s. And two key things about me that might come up. We had a VCR from about 1975, so there'll be programmes I taped and knew very well. And I've read the campaign diaries of Mary Whitehouse, the famous Christian activist who was the big campaigner to clean up TV. So I might be quoting from them where appropriate.
I think that's shocking that you had a VCR in 1975. I didn't get one until 1986. And the first thing I taped was an episode of Wogan. Anyway, that's a fascinating fact about me. I'm the Telegraph's head of TV and radio. I've worked in TV journalism for about 20 years. I'm a massive TV nerd and I grew up watching telly in a very telly-orientated family. We are looking at some shows from September 1975, and the other thing about September is, of course, as it is today, that's the start of the big autumn season on telly when all the best new shows are unveiled. So coming up in today's episode...
What's happened to the old idea of doing something for your fellow man? Of service? I mean, today, people just... Yes, I'm coming!
Tell me, do you believe in ghosts?
I've got fairly effectively fast in my bracelets.
Rory, tell us a story.
Professor! He's gone berserk!
So you heard there Fawlty Towers, Shadows, The Growing Pains of PC Penrose, Animal Kwackers, and Samira's favourite, Space 1999.
Oh, yes. Now, the other crucial thing is, of course, that we both grew up in the 70s, so we have what they now call lived experience. And I was also thinking ahead of doing this today that, you know, YouTube is now the second most watched outlet in the UK over ITV. So we're really venturing back into another time, another era when TV ruled supreme.
Well, in 1975, we're at a kind of tipping point between colour and black and white, but still 57% were watching on black and white sets.
Do you know, we had a colour TV and a black and white portable in 1975. Luxury.
My family didn't get a colour set until about, I think, 1982. It wowed us when we saw the true colour of Ivy Tilsley's hair in Coronation Street.
I can imagine. So if we look at the top-rated shows in September 1975, you've got the ITV sitcom Man About the House and the BBC's one's The Two Ronnies, got a comedy show. 8 million households tuning into each. That's an interesting metric. What is a household measured like?
So a household is probably about 4 people per household. But if we're talking in terms that are kind of more comparable to viewing figures today, looking at the year in general, audiences of about 20 million were not uncommon for big shows like The Royal Variety Performance, Miss World, or, of course, Benny Hill. You
know, I was thinking 1975 is also the peak of the women's liberation movement, and you can see why.
It's 7:20pm on Monday, September the 1st, and the launch of Angels, BBC One's new drama serial about student nurses set at the fictional St Angela's Hospital.
I remember this show well, and I love the excitement of that title tune. And the medical drama, Graham, it's always been a stalwart of TV. I was thinking Emergency Ward 10 in the UK, General Hospital, Dr Kildare in the US. And this was a real fixture in the evening schedules. A focus on young women, family viewing, but quite gritty at times. Did you watch it growing up?
Well, I hate to say this so early on, but I was a bit young for Angels, but it was definitely something that was a presence in my house. It was the kind of thing that might signal that it was time for me to go to bed. But it did run through the 70s up to 1983. So, yes, I did catch some of it. I was never really the core demographic. I always found the music kind of terrifying. And in my mind, the whole show had a sort of a Grange Hill ethos in that it felt sort of slightly forbidden and dangerous and very urban. And I grew up in the countryside, and so this was very London-centric. But watching it now, actually, I found it quite oddly gentle, and this opening episode anyway is quite moving in places.
Yeah, well, it sort of starts with, you know, a focus on 2 of these young student nurses who are going to move to this big hospital in London, and you're kind of, it's like a going to school kind of drama template, isn't it? You know, these young women from different backgrounds all kind of converging on this hospital and being introduced to how it works. And I was really struck by the class theme. So you've got the Fiona Fullerton middle-class girl who's from a very affluent family whose dad is baffled at why you want to be a nurse. And then you've got the working-class girl from rural Ireland who's leaving the family farm and her widowed mother to head across on the ferry.
Yes, and we start in rural Ireland, and that character is Maureen Morahan, who's played by Erin Gerety. And the opening scene, it looks like something from All Creatures Great and Small in a way. You've got a very kind of countryside setting with a vintage car coming down the hill. And then her counterpart, because we're seeing it through two sets of eyes, is Fiona Fullerton, who's playing Patricia Rutherford. So they're both going to be starting out and both taking journeys into the big city to become nurses. And there are two really nice kind of parallel conversations that we hear between them and their loved ones. So why don't we just take a listen first to Fiona Fullerton's character talking to her father, who's played by the excellent Geoffrey Palmer.
I know. Your generation has the monopoly on real life with capital letters. We're just cartoons.
You're all fakes, you armchair liberals.
Unlike you. Taking up nursing to keep up with your trendy pals working for shelter. Oh, look. We didn't object to your going to the training college.
Well, naturally, that was a nice, clean job.
Well, it was your own decision to give it up.
But it wasn't what I wanted to do.
And nursing is?
Well, that's what I'm going to find out.
I know you find this incredible, but God knows I'm not trying to interfere. I just want you to examine your motives before you plunge in yet again with all banners flying.
And fail?
Well, yes. If you're not being totally honest with yourself. If you're doing this for all the wrong reasons.
Because I fancy myself in those dinky little caps and aprons, for instance. Remarkably high opinion you have of me, Dad.
God, what a rich conversation. There's so much in there, isn't there?
Yes, I can't remember when I last heard a conversation where people were engaged or perplexed or fascinated by the idea of kind of armchair politics. Do people still talk about that today? I'm not sure that it is, but certainly an armchair liberal, and it's a really interesting and detailed conversation. He's not being awful, but he's kind of challenging her, isn't he? And he's saying, he's got a slight suspicion that she's doing it to be trendy.
Yeah, and I love that this is, not long before Butterflies. And, he can do pure comedy and he can do something that's a father in a more drama-based context. And they're both recognisably him. I have to say, I once saw him outside Broadcasting House and he smiled at me. And I felt like the benediction of the heavens had fallen upon me.
So at the same time, Erin Gerety's character is having this conversation with her mum, and this is all about how rural Ireland sees the depravities of London.
Sure, haven't we had this argument enough? Can't you just say goodbye and wish me luck?
You'll change. They lead different lives, the English. More permissive.
And you don't trust me, is that it?
I don't trust them. They drink.
And the Irish don't. Real little band of angels we are this side of the water.
I never thought you'd go. Not when it really come to it. I felt that
But how about how I feel? Or doesn't that count?
But you could train here. You can still be a nurse.
I'd have to wait another year, maybe more. You know that, Mammy.
Again, I really love the way that in just a few lines you get that sense of what London represents in 1975. The idea that the mother's not worried about her daughter, she's worried about London and the kind of attitudes that might endanger her daughter. I mean, that really rings true, doesn't it?
Really, from the ground up, Angels is a show that's run by women, which I think really helps it. It feels very genuine. It feels like it really knows its subject. It was created by Paula Milne, who would go on to write The Politician's Wife, and Adele Rose scripted episode 1. And the thing about her, which maybe you can tell from watching this, is that she was the first female scriptwriter ever on Coronation Street, but she was also its longest serving writer. And she really has a feel for characters, or maybe this idea of, maybe we should say archetypes of characters, because you really understand all these people who are coming together, don't you, in the show?
Yeah, because there's women of colour, and it's not made a big deal of it, but I think there are plot lines about racism and harassment and all the kinds of things to come.
The other thing that's interesting is this episode was directed by Julia Smith, who would actually later become the producer of Angels, and she would then work with a script editor called Tony Holland. And of course, once Angels was finished in 1982, they would then go on to co-create EastEnders together. And actually, under Julia's reign, Angels itself turned into a soap. So they, partway through, they ditched it being one 50-minute episode per week, and it turned into this twice-weekly soap in 1979. And then, in a bit of weirdness, They also relocated to Birmingham and introduced a second hospital and gradually phased out the London hospital.
So it's kind of it sets a template really for a huge amount of the expansion in television storytelling and drama and soaps that was to come really. There's kind of, I mean, I guess you could argue it's the start of a new golden age, isn't it, of soaps? It
kind of is. It's sort of mainstream social realism, isn't it? It's tea time social realism in a way, in that we have these characters who we come to know and love and feel comfortable with, and then through them it's able to look at issues. I mean, two of the big issues for Angels were alcoholism, because there was the idea that these are young women who were under stress in a difficult job, and promiscuity. I think there was a huge controversy around a storyline about birth control later on in its run.
Good Lord, birth control day. What will they do next? Excellent. Well, I'm really glad to rewatch that. I have to say, if that was to turn up on iPlayer, I think a bit like iClaudius, I think it would be a huge draw. I really do. Let's have a quick reminder of what was going on culturally in Britain 50 years ago. So in the charts, you've got Rod Stewart's Sailing. You've got David Essex's Hold Me Close, which takes over at number 1. And in cinemas, you've got The Four Musketeers, you've got Rollerball and The French Connection 2.
50 years ago this month on BBC Radio, Noel Edmonds was doing the Radio 1 Breakfast Show with Terry Wogan on Radio 2. But commercial radio has been up and running for 2 years with the likes of Capital Radio and LBC in London and Piccadilly Radio in Manchester, challenging the BBC.
Right, we're going to talk about next.
So one of the cultural trends of the mid-70s was the mainstream fascination with the occult and ESP, or extrasensory perception. And so much so that come September 1975, it dribbled down to children's television with the debut of Thames TV's ghostly anthology series Shadows on Wednesday the 3rd of September.
Your hot water, miss. Thank you very much. Who's my neighbour?
Neighbour?
The person next door. It sounded like a girl. I heard her coughing.
There's nobody in there, miss. You're the only one along here.
Oh, are you sure?
Must have been somebody passing along the corridor.
It's a self-contained half-hour drama set in a Victorian household. This young woman's arrived, ironically, given that we're talking about Angels just now, to be a nurse. And there's all this discussion about, oh, young women, what will they be doing next, wearing trousers? And then in her room, she hears a call and she finds herself walking through the door into an adjoining room, which is obviously a modern bedroom, with this young girl with a high fever. And this Victorian girl finds herself looking at these strange modern objects like a telephone and a hairdryer. And then there's a fire. I'm fascinated by it. It's all done in half an hour.
It's really taut bit of writing. It's called The Future Ghost, and it's by Roger Marshall. And the thing with Shadows then was it's an anthology series, a bit like Armchair Thriller or something, but for kids. And it's specifically a ghostly anthology series. It's very, if you remember, did you watch that Yorkshire Schools programme, How We Used to Live?
Yeah.
You ever have to watch it? Yeah, it's a very How We Used to Live kind of Victorian London, where someone opens a window and says, oh, it's a proper pea super out there. It's Jane Weinmark from Poldark who's playing this young woman who's, again, come to the big city to be a nurse. And we've got John Nettleton as Mr. Butler, and he's doing his kind of usual John Nettleton, fusty but also kind of fruity Dickensian character. And then Verna Harvey, who plays the future ghost.
And so the idea is that this Victorian girl realises that while she was in the future, there was a fire that burnt down her room and she wasn't there. And she suddenly walks back into the daytime of her Victorian life and realises that but being called into the next room had saved her from this fire.
Tell me, do you believe in ghosts?
Ghosts, miss?
Yes.
Well,
I do, because I saw one in this very hotel last night.
Honestly?
Cross my heart.
What was it like? A horrible old man?
No, it was a girl, just like you or me.
Oh. Did she smell of old graves and musty churchyards?
Not a bit. She smelt of soap, a sort of scent.
Oh. Well, was there any blood?
No, she wasn't even dead. In fact, I don't think she'd been born.
Not born?
No.
What do you mean?
This wasn't a ghost out of the past. It was a ghost from the future.
Yeah, it's really nicely done. It's a bit M.R. James, and I say that with all the good and bad of M.R. James, because I always find his stuff a bit slight, in a way. So there's no kind of zinger or twist in the tale. But so when she gets out of bed in the middle of the night because she hears someone calling out, Nothing is said at that point, but you can see smoke kind of coming up through the floorboards. So there is a hint that...
Although I thought it was the pea souper.
Yes, I thought that as well. I thought, they've kind of slightly overdone it on the atmospherics. But it's really confidently put together. I mean, the script editor on this was Ruth Boswell, who had co-created Time Slip, which was a sci-fi, quite a high-concept sci-fi series from the start of the decade. And she'd also produced The Tomorrow People. And then the producer was Pamela Lonsdale, who'd created Rainbow, but also Ace of Wands, which was about a kind of a groovy, funky magician who fought baddies. And again, that was a kids' show in the 70s.
There's something about time slip programming in the 70s. As you mentioned, The Tomorrow People, it's quite similar territory in a way to The Georgian House, which absolutely freaked me out, where these modern children are trying to save a young black boy from slavery in the Georgian era. And it's that sense of the same physical space in two different time periods. It's a real thing about 70s children's programming. So that's the children's version, but you've chosen a kind of more grown-up, factual ESP story. Tell us about this one.
I found this one absolutely mesmerising. It's called Leap in the Dark, and it's hosted by Colin Wilson, who was a writer who in the 50s was one of the angry young men of British literature, but by the early 70s he'd really branched out into writing about the occult. So the fourth series aired at 9:30pm on the 19th of September after Fawlty Towers, which we're going to come back to, and was titled The Rosenheim Poltergeist. But sadly, I wasn't able to get a viewing copy of that particular episode, but I did look at an edition that went out on the 10th of October titled The Vandy Case. Over the years, the show slightly changed format. At this point in its life, what would happen is Wilson would introduce a reconstruction of a paranormal incident, not lurid reconstructions as we're kind of used to today. So they're always a little prosaic and heavily footnoted, and then he would discuss the veracity of the incident with a trio of experts. So it's a bit like Danny Robbins's Uncanny podcast or TV series, but so much more earnest.
You've got three intellectuals sitting around, all with beautiful cut glass accents, all with their glasses, all serious boffins in a way, if I can use that word. But they all take very seriously the possibilities. Was it telepathy, or was it some kind of ESP, and is there life after death? And I love that they're debating it in such earnestness. It's hard to explain. I know, I've worked what it is. I think this is what happens when you don't have the internet. See, now this kind of thing, people have long involved discussions, don't they, over social media about a sort of paranormal phenomenon. And this is where you used to go and watch it on television and watch people for an hour debate it really earnestly.
So the case they're talking about here is called the Vandy case, and it's about this guy called Edgar Vandy who drowned in 1933. And he had gone off with who they describe as a business associate, a guy called Nelson Charters. They'd gone off for a kind of a summer bike ride and then a swim. There's all sorts of odd details in this, in that he didn't have a swimming costume, and so he borrowed a woman's swimming costume. Anyway, he goes into a lake. He has some kind of injury and he drowns. And there's a moment in this, because we're used to reconstructions, we're used to actors wearing mutton chops and getting dressed up for the olden days. But there is a bit where actually a participant from the story comes along and actually gives his own account of what happens. And I found this quite spellbinding. So let's just listen to Charles Vandy.
The telephone rang about 4 o'clock. I went to answer it. It was Charters speaking, and he told me that Edgar was dead, and had been drowned. Of course, I shouted at him. I shouted, "What have you done?" And I collapsed.
I suppose this is the thing, one thinks about 1933. It was only 42 years before 1975, so Charles Vandy's brother is actually still around and able to contribute. And I just found his testimony in the middle of all this. When you're listening to something you think of as a dead subject in every single way, in terms of it's a closed book, it's from years gone by, people have perished, and then suddenly here is someone actually talking in the present tense about how he felt to receive a phone call that said his brother had died. What did you make of that bit, Samira?
I was quite moved by it, partly because he doesn't himself believe in life after death, does he? He's quite sceptical. But there's something very moving about this generation of Edwardians and Victorians who were living into the 1970s and finding their experiences being kind of interrogated in this new medium of television. It's like the past talking to the future.
And so it's a long way around. It's a bit of a shaggy dog story, this, but what then happens is that Charles Vandy and the other surviving brother go to some psychics to see if they can tell them how Edgar actually died. And one of the psychics is Frances Campbell. Did you notice who played Frances Campbell in the reconstruction?
Yes, I did. I thought she looked like someone from Space 1999, and it was Enia Merton who played Sandra.
So already there are spooky things happening to us. So she was a psychic known to Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. And actually this is really the crux, isn't it, of the studio discussion, because 3 psychics independently give quite accurate readings about Edgar Vandy and his life and his death. And so Colin Wilson and 3 of his guests, who are all learned professors in psychology, have a discussion about, is there life after death? It seems an astounding thing to hear debated on telly after Fawlty Towers. But let's just listen to a bit of Dr. John Cohen, a professor of psychology, talking about necromancy.
Let's get back to this working hypothesis, though, that it could be either telepathy or life after death. Why do you all seem to be so firmly set against the life after death one?
Well, necromancers for millennia have been calling up the dead without much success.
Yeah.
It's still the burn from which no traveller returns. But as I say, I would love to believe, and I think most people would love to believe.
No, but from the evidence
here, there's doesn't seem to be anything at all convincing that Edgar is in fact there talking to the mediums.
You know, I really enjoyed that, and it's worth looking up because John Cohen, he's got a kind of Conan Doyle, well, sort of Sherlock Holmes vibe about him, with this elegant profile and this big shock of white hair and the intellectual debate. But I've got a theory about why these shows are thriving in the mid-70s. And another example, of course, is Arthur C. Clarke's Mysterious World. And it's something that Tom Hiddleston said about making that film you may not have seen called, I think, Kong Skull Island, that the 1970s is the last point before GPS and where you could find where anyone was at any time. And I think technology crossed a threshold. But at this point in the 70s, it's still possible to be completely out of touch with the outside world, for there to be genuine mysteries. It's still a very analogue world.
I grew up in the 70s watching or hearing some of these shows and these discussions, seeing some of these books, and they all seem to come from the premise that we're very close to having some kind of scientific breakthrough that's going to make some sort of paranormal proof, which sadly has still never come. But there's a real certainty in the way they talk about stuff, doesn't it? That we are on the cusp of, we don't quite understand yet, all these kind of qualifying phrases that make it seem like, there is some explorers who are about to break through the veil and reveal everything to us.
A bit like Aliens, we haven't found them yet either.
The other thing that struck me is I mentioned Danny Robbins' Uncanny, which does massive business now, but I think there's an element of fun and campery in that, and I'm not saying that in a pejorative way, because I think that's great in terms of how it discusses its subject matter, which just isn't present in this at all, is it? There's no side to this. There's no sort of, isn't this a bit silly?
It's sincere. This is the era where this stuff was taken seriously, even if we know that they're all sceptics. That show and the others we've discussed so far are all kind of capsules of the past, aren't they? They're fossils in a way. But 1975 threw up some absolutely enduring gems as well. Yes, you'll recognise that theme tune. It's Fawlty Towers, the John Cleese and Connie Booth scripted sitcom set in a small Devon hotel. And the very first episode aired on BBC Two on Friday, the 19th of September. Graham, I didn't realise that Series 1 is several years before Series 2. Tell us about how this sitcom emerges like this.
Fawlty Towers emerges through a long kind of period of development. I mean, it's said that Cleese was inspired by Donald Sinclair, owner of the Glen Eagles Hotel in Torquay, Devon, where Monty Python stayed in 1970. And I find it fascinating that Cleese was part of Monty Python, a very avant-garde comedy unit, and he decides the next thing he wants to do is go back and write a traditional BBC sitcom, and he does so with his then wife, Connie Booth. And scripts for the episodes took about 6 weeks, I think, per episode. So a lot of R&D went into that, and I'm sure I read somewhere that they used to plot out their storylines on rolls of wallpaper because the storylines are so full of incident, and they wanted to be able to chart things almost as a diagram. And you really get that feeling, don't you? Because it's like a Heath Robinson machine in a way. There's so many little cogs and wheels. It's such a satisfactory watch, isn't it?
Yeah.
That you see things precipitate and set stuff up.
Yeah, we should say, for a pilot episode or an opening episode, it's completely fully formed. All the characters seem real. We already immediately establish a relationship between, the kind of angry and slightly mad Basil and his terror of his wife Sybil, who says very little, but she has real authority. And there's a huge amount of physical movement through the hotel. It actually touches on the whole class dynamics of snobbery because he's put an advert in Country Life, which his wife objects to. And then a guy turns up saying, "I'm Lord Melbury," and he's fawning over this apparent aristocrat. And it's just, I don't know, I couldn't believe, I was very ready to be disappointed, and I couldn't believe how well oiled a machine it already was in episode 1.
Yeah, it's fascinating because Cleese and Booth are getting gags and big laughs with an assumption that the audience already know the characters. They do little character things.
Basil,
Yes, dear?
are you going to hang the picture?
Yes, I am, dear, yes.
When?
Well, when I've...
Well, why don't you do it now?
Well, I'm doing this, dear. I'm doing the menu.
Well, you've got all morning to do the menu. Why don't you hang the picture now? Well?
Yes, all right, I won't do the menu. I don't think you realise how long it takes to do the menu, but no, it doesn't matter. I'll hang the picture now. And if the menus are late for lunch, it doesn't matter. The guests can all come and look at the picture till they are ready, right?
And it does seem to work. And it gets a warm response all the way through, but I notice the laughs get bigger and louder as it goes along, as the audience start to get up to speed and everything kind of clicks. And of course, there's someone in the studio, kind of a fluffer, who's going to be prompting the audience to applaud at the end. But there are cheers over those end credits, a real kind of celebration, kind of jubilation.
Yeah, well, it feels genuinely theatrical, like a theatrical event. And unlike other sitcoms of the era where, you have a sense when they go exterior that, it's kind of canned laughter or they're watching a film and there's a bit of laughter at the top. This feels like it didn't need the laughter. You'd still be laughing at home. But the audience are genuinely reacting to what they're seeing. And I've got to say, the character of Manuel, the Spanish waiter from Barcelona, God, he's acted well. There's you just feel great affection for this character. He is a kind of caricature, but he's a completely original caricature of himself, rather than a Spanish stereotype, I thought. I was really interested, because all the things people say about the episodes you can't watch anymore because they've got references to things that are considered unacceptable now. This somehow transcends all those concerns, for me anyway.
Yeah, and there's a great gag at the start. It's a Spanish language gag where he's talking about on those trays.
There is too much butter on those trays.
No, senor.
What?
Not on those trays. No, sir. Uno, dos, tres.
The other thing I love is it's the class comedy, and we've got, again, another Poldark star, Robin Ellis, who's playing this undercover police officer that Basil considers a bit uncouth, and he's there tracking down the con man Lord Melbury. But class comedies, I mean, that's something we're never going to see again, do you think? Or do you think that it's still covert as part of British humour? It's certainly not overt in this way, is it?
Yeah, I think it is still part of British humour. I think what's lovely is how it's a genuine across the classes comedy rather than just a middle class comedy of embarrassment. It's essential that you have people who he considers above him and beneath him for it to work. And just, little things like, what I find really interesting watching it is how, as a child, because this is one of the shows we taped on the new VCR, although not Series 1, it was Series 2. And I found myself quite pained at the excruciating complexity that he would get himself in this terrible situation.
Yeah.
And watching it again as an adult, you actually just really lean into it, and you enjoy watching him wrap himself up in a mess, because he's ignoring the chap who's not important enough for him anymore, who's trying to order drinks, and that sense of all these. It's like a cartoon, isn't it?
I was going to say that because I think it works for kids. I think if when I was a little kid watching it, the characters are like living cartoons, which is really strange because that would almost run counter to what we're saying about all the little character details we get there. But there's a kind of a largesse to everything as well, isn't there?
Yeah, and at the time it was recognised as something great, wasn't it?
Well, the initial reviews were actually a little bit lukewarm. It's one of those shows that kind of had to live a little bit. Certainly by the time the second series came around, which wasn't until 1979 because Cleese and Booth divorce, and there were things like BBC strikes, and then also, as I said, just the amount of time it takes to write these episodes. Certainly by the time the second series came around, it was already received and expected to be the return of a massive classic TV series. And did you read that interview with Connie Booth in the Radio Times recently?
Yeah.
She was talking about how the writing process.
Yeah, I thought it was really interesting. And, she said that she didn't write the dialogue. She said that's all credit to John Cleese. But it was structured together. And I think she was instrumental in making sure that the lines that he wrote worked. So the women talked the way that women would. And that's one of the reasons that relationship with Sybil rings so true, doesn't it?
Yes. So should we move on and talk about another comedy that premiered in September 1975? This is a Roy Clark sitcom. Now, Roy Clark invented Lost the Summer Wine and Open All Hours, but this is based on his own experiences of being a policeman. It's called The Growing Pains of P.C. Penrose.
Sit down, make yourself at home,
Mrs. Threadgold, there's something you ought to know about me.
Hello.
I've got fairly effectively fast in my bracelets.
Oh!
I was practising a bit, you see. I had this powerful vision of being the fastest handcuff in the West.
OK, so that was The Growing Pains of P.C. Penrose, which aired on BBC One on Tuesday the 2nd of September at 9:25. And this is following Paul Greenwood, who in my childhood looms larger as Captain Zepp, but that was in the 1980s, but he's playing P.C. Penrose. And really, it's a very simple opening episode. It's showing this new recruit to the police force who's working in the Yorkshire town of Slagcastle. And it's sort of like there isn't even really one plot thread through it, isn't it? It's sort of his travails in the opening day when he's working under Sergeant Flagg, who's played in a slightly Windsor Davis-esque way by Brian Pringle.
What I found weird about this, because I used to watch Rosie, which is sort of what this series became, and it was focused on, the Greenwood character. And much is made of the fact that he was handsome, and the episode is called something, hasn't he got lovely eyelashes? And it's slightly strange for that reason too, because the 70s isn't an era you associate with people going on and on about a bloke being beautiful. And then it's got a whole brass band theme tune and these kind of strange, almost music hall type characters. And then some very odd moments of sexism where I think his superior comes out of a room, has got a big lipstick kiss. It's like one of the perks of the job. And there's references to the size of women's breasts very explicitly. It was just slightly baffled me, I'll be honest.
What I found baffling was its kind of verboseness, and all of the characters speak in a very intricate, very beautifully written but very writily written way. Let's just listen to this.
Cheer up, lad. Baptism of fire.
Oh, it was horrible.
We've all flesh, lad.
How is she?
Fine, healthy boy. The woman next door delivered it. She sends all her thanks for all the hot water.
I'm going to be an howling success, aren't I? The wilting policeman.
You won't be the last man to crumble before his first close-up of the female predicament. Most of us, we're luckier, that's all. We start more gently with sudden deaths and nasty accidents.
So that's the scene where he'd fainted after having had to help a woman give birth and was carried back into the police station by ambulance men, who are obviously a rival tribe.
Yes, and this is one of the many misfortunes that befalls him. So I found the whole thing quite strange, and you were talking about a lot of the sexually laden elements and people fixating on him and how pretty he is. And it's very strange because it's quite metrosexual. Men and women alike seem to be very taken, don't they, with Paul Greenwood's P.C. Penrose.
I suppose I'll get used to it, but it's a bit embarrassing suddenly becoming responsible for the world's loveliest policeman.
How do you think I feel?
Like velvet.
I think what hit me, is after all I realised they're projecting at such a high level. It's almost like they think they're doing old-fashioned radio comedy, something like the Navy Lark, where you're in this fictional world that was set on a Navy ship, and everyone's sort of an exaggerated character within the framework of that world. That's what this felt like, rather than, you compare it to Angels. I know Angels isn't a comedy, but something which seems to be realistic. This is technically realistic. A lot of it is shot on location. It's all exteriors and things, and yet it doesn't feel real at all. It feels like you're on a musical stage for the dialogue.
And I suppose the corollary of this is all of the characters sound the same, don't they?
Yeah. They don't sound like individual people, do they? They all sound like the voice of the writer.
It's a kind of a Greek chorus. So we've just got this one character, PC Penrose, lost in a weird world where people talk weirdly. I mean, some of it's quite funny, but I found it hard to. It doesn't have the immediacy, does it, of Fawlty Towers, where you can click into what's going on and understand people's motivations. Here, everyone's a bit elliptical and odd.
Yeah, it's definitely harking back to the 50s, isn't it?
Roy Clark's been writing for TV. Well, he's still writing for TV. He's still doing Still Open All Hours. I think he's in his 90s now, and I understand he goes into a shed, will still turn out episodes of things, whether he's been commissioned to or not. So he's got I think he can withstand a bit of criticism from you and I, because he's got a stellar career that's still ongoing, and he has his place in TV history. But I just found this. I take you didn't find Rosie quite as perplexing when you used to watch that.
Well, I now need to rewatch it. Wonder what was I thinking? But at the time, I was quite charmed by it. I think I did quite like Paul Greenwood. He was quite cute. He did have lovely eyelashes and all that. Now, the US government recently announced a big push to develop nuclear reactors on the moon, which only goes to show, I think, Graham, that they have not been paying attention to one of the greatest TV shows of all time.
Yes, it's Space 1999, which debuted on Thames at least at 5:50 p.m. on Saturday, 6th of September.
And Graham, have you noticed that most of the programmes we've been looking at today have cracking theme title sequences like that one? This is a wonderful one with a bit of a disco beat. So it was Gerry and Sylvia Anderson's answer to Star Trek, and the premise is that there's a base on the moon where they've been storing nuclear waste the way that you do, and there's an explosion and the moon is hurled out of Earth's orbit into deep space. So they're kind of on an uncontrolled trajectory, and they're desperate to try and find somewhere to live, and that's how the series and series 2 kind of pan out. But the series, this episode, Breakaway, is kind of the whole lead up to how it happens, and there's strange things happening on the moon and people are dying and they don't realise it's because there's this massive nuclear explosion that is going to come. And I just have to say, I love this show. I used to play at it. I used to dream about being... What did I want to be? Well, I wanted to be a character from Series 2, which is controversial. But it was an expensive show. These are the people who made Thunderbird. So there's lots of explosions, lots of terrific models. But it's hugely influential. And the storytelling is quite grown up. There's a lot of horror themes to come. A lot of hideous deaths and kind of monstrous hauntings. And actually, there's a whole ESP episode, Graham.
Quite right too. Well, it was the most expensive TV series made in the UK up to that time. It was around about 130k per episode. And Sir Lou Grade of ATV had already placed a hold on Space at Pinewood because he was expecting a Smash It second series to follow his Smash It first series. And he'd also sold it across America. But you're saying that you're a super fan of the show. And you really are. You've proven that, haven't you, on primetime BBC?
Yeah, no. So I won not just Mastermind, but Celebrity Mastermind of Masterminds. I beat other Mastermind winners with this as my specialist subject, and I wore a costume from Series 1. And before we get into the whole Series 1 versus Series 2, which is a huge issue, and it's a very sensitive subject, I think the thing to emphasise is that, this looked grand too. It had Martin Landau and Barbara Bain from Mission Impossible as the leads. He's the commander. She's the kind of Beverly Crusher to his Picard kind of thing. And there's a really lovely international cast. A lot of actors of Caribbean heritage. There's an Australian Nick Tate who was kind of sort of ace pilot Alan. And so you had this sense of, I always thought of it was like London in space. All these people from the Commonwealth, very international. The computer technology looks very shiny and new. I mean, you're not a super fan. What did you make of watching this?
Well, I mean, the first thing I made of it was it's really funny, but you can see the money. I mean, it's really beautifully put together. The sets are huge. The lighting is great.
The sound effects are great. The little bleepings and things of the computers and the doors.
The world building is so superb. So they have little things like they have these kind of little, almost like TV remote controls to open doors, don't they, that the actors press as they go through. And they have these little video communicators, which a bit like a kind of a Zoom call today. All of that kind of stuff is fantastic. I found it a little bit earnest, I think. Let's just listen to a scene where Martin Landau's Commander John Koenig meets Barbara Bain's Helena Russell for the first time, and they talk about the awful situation they find themselves in.
Doctor, when will our Metaprobe astronauts recover from this virus? It's not a virus. What they have is an unusual form of brain damage. Their condition is critical.
So they're not going to recover. What about the backup crew? Are they medically clear to fly this mission?
I can say they're as fit as astronauts Warren and Sparkman were before they were affected.
What's that supposed to mean?
Commander, I saw the 9th man die this morning. One moment he was fine. The next he lost all control. Here. This is a thermographic plate. A malignancy erupts. There's immediate disorientation of the kind that's classic in radiation attacks.
Doctor, you've had 11 cases so far.
9 deaths.
Yes, but all of those who died were workers at Nuclear Disposal Area 2. It's inconsistent.
So when you hear that, they're in dire straits, but I find something about it's a bit of the Star Trek factor as well, in that these shows are populated with really capable people, and sometimes I think that means the drama slightly falls over flat because everyone is unflappable. No one's panicking, are they, on Moonbase Alpha?
Well, you say that. There usually turns out to be someone at some point who's flapping. And there's a notorious episode called Earthbound where the Commissioner Simmons, who's ended up trapped with them, is desperate to get off the planet and forces his way onto an alien spacecraft and ends up not in hibernation on the way to Earth, but wakes up realising that there's 79 years to go and he's not in hibernation. He's going to die in this glass box, screaming and banging on the sides of it. And that's where you get the great drama, and these capable, good people who run the base are constantly dealing with nutters like that.
Is this one of the things you liked about it? There was the capabilities of everyone, that this is a kind of real... I mean, it's very optimistic, but this is a real elite group of people. And, you know, as we've said, a multicultural elite group. Is that what you liked, you know, as a young girl watching it?
Yeah, but what made it really 70s was actually it's not an optimistic show. Like, people are always dying. And when I used to make little model versions of this game, I used to drop rocks on it and all the characters would be sort of scattered and everything would be broken and they'd be doing emergency repairs. And somehow they would still be accepting casualties in a kind of broken and burning NHS ward equivalent. And Kevin Fong, who's also a super fan, the broadcaster who made the 13 Minutes to the Moon podcast for many years, he said he loved this show because it kind of was this idea that you've got a vocation. But the bleakness is actually one of the problems with the show, it's argued, that it didn't have the success that they thought it would. And so we don't have to go into big detail, but the series 2, they brought in a producer from Star Trek called Freddie Freiberger, who sacked a lot of the original cast, redesigned the sets, it made no sense, and brought in more fun. And every episode would end with a little jokey moment, like they were on the bridge of the Enterprise. And it was, you know, there was flirtiness, and it just ruined the really stark existential horror, I think, which is what the appeal of the original is. Plus, I've got to mention the costumes, which were designed by Rudy Gernreich, who designed the topless bathing suit. It was quite a big deal in the 60s. And they're all beige and sort of this great jersey fabric, and they are incredibly unflattering, even on, you know, the loveliest of women. There's no girdles and everyone's sort of moobs are showing. But there's a line I wrote when I wrote an article for you about the show. It's like, even Commander Koenig has some visible, what did I call it, executive VPL as he walks down the corridors.
I was talking about the kind of the stoicism of these characters, the capability, and at the end of the episode, you know, when they realise that the moon is being blown out of orbit, all of this comes together in a really, really brilliant scene. Mm-hmm. We see a transmission from Earth initially. It cuts to kind of a newsroom and you're thinking, well, how come we're seeing this again? And then it turns out they're watching it on Moonbase Alpha, and then it kind of fades away.
The signal breaks up as, they're getting further and further away from Earth.
And I had never realised until I watched this, Koenig was a new commander to the base. He hadn't been there all along, and he has to win over these people, I guess. There's a sense of that, and he makes a brilliant speech. And TV, particularly TV sci-fi, is often precipitated or pivots on a big speech, and most of the time I think those speeches really aren't up to the job. But let's just listen to this one.
Attention all sections Alpha. This is Commander John Koenig. As you know, our moon has been blasted out of orbit. We have been completely cut off from planet Earth. As we are, we have power, environment, and therefore the possibility of survival. If we should try to improvise a return to Earth without travel plots, without full resources, it is my belief that we would fail. Therefore, in my judgment, we do not try.
I mean, that's brilliant, isn't it? It's really kind of all the things I've been slagging off for, in a way. It's really understated and pragmatic.
And also, isn't there a kind of reference to JFK's speech about why we must go to the moon? It's like we're not going to attempt to follow this escape plan. I mean, it reverses it. That's what I mean. There's a pessimism that balances out the super capability.
But there's a certainty of what we should do next. And you think, if I was on that crew now, I would fall in and think, OK, he is the right man for the job, and I think we might have a chance here.
Yeah, and it's best, and you really see it in Series 1. You get the supporting crew, like people acting like Prentice Hancock, kind of, who's his kind of Paul is number one, just completely backing him. They all trust him. And I realised watching this, I was born in 1968, so it was watching my own generation in the future, because in 1999 we'd have all been in our late 20s.
Yeah.
And suddenly I realised one day that was watching myself, in 20 years. It was quite lovely.
Do you believe in rock and roll?
In the days when, we only had 3 channels, everyone had shared viewing. So there was a slot for children's TV, which was about 3 or 3:30 till about 5:30, and it would start with usually something short and then longer programmes, and then you would end up with something short again. And they really varied, didn't they, by region? And ITV was doing very different stuff. I have to confess, I rarely watched ITV for children's television, even though my family weren't sort of brought up in a kind of class way. You just somehow knew that BBC was where children should be. But you've chosen an ITV show, haven't you?
Well, I have, yeah, one that I'm fascinated about. So in a very quick bit of history, but in 1972, the broadcasting restrictions had been lifted and ITV was allowed to start broadcasting during the day, which meant things like Emmerdale arrived and Rainbow and Pipkins. And then in 1975, we sort of got the second wave of children's shows, and they include a programme called Animal Kwackers.
Starship and off we go.
Spelt Kwackers. Very, very wild and wacky.
Parkland, here we come to Parkland. Animal Kwackers, Animal Kwackers.
And this aired midday on Thames and began on Thursday the 25th of September, and in fact led into Pipkins, which then followed on. And, well, let's just listen to a bit from Animal Kwackers first. So the programme is, 12 minutes long, I think. It sort of gets going and then it's over, but it's very much influenced by the banana splits. We've got these 4 animals, basically men in pelts, quite scraggy looking pelts as well, who are a kind of a glam rock band, aren't they? So we have Rory the lion on guitar, and he was played by Roy Apps. We've got Twang, who's a monkey on bass, who's played by Nick Pallett. We've got Bongo, a dog on drums, played by Jeff Nichols. And we've got Boots, who I found so terrifying because he's a tiger, played by Tony Hannaford. But not only is he a lead guitarist tiger, he has an eye patch. I think he looks quite sinister, but they've sort of got a bit of... What do you think? What are their influences here? Is it glam rock?
It is glam rock. It's funny, I just assumed it was on later, like early evening, because it had a slightly sleazy feel to it, partly because the pelts are so gross. But also just there's an awful lot of them just rocking. And I found myself thinking of watching The Sweet on Crackerjack play Teenage Rampage. There's something about the music which is incongruous. And then there's vaguely a story.
Rory, Rory, tell us a story. Rory, Rory, tell it like it is.
But it just felt like it's like they really wanted to make a more grown-up pop show, but they've somehow had to squeeze it into this format. It also reminds me of a show that I loathed when I had my own children, which was Tweenies, that it's just too loud. Sorry, that makes you sound very old and grumpy.
It does, but it's interesting what you're saying, because it also has something of the fanzine about it. The opening titles are really appallingly sort of drawn animation of these characters.
Best thing about it is the animation.
You like that, do you? I think,
Yeah,
again, I just found it scary. It looks like, I don't know what it looks like. It looks like something that the bad child beside you at school would draw on the cover of his book when he was defacing.
Well, that's ITV children's programming for
is?
you. What can I say, Graham? You see, this is why I didn't watch it.
And so it's really baffling, but I kind of find it sort of charming. I don't really understand the point of it. They do an old school nursery rhyme, and then they do a kind of a real, quite a sexy song as well.
Meet Tarzan and Eugene. Meet Tarzan and Eugene. Jungle love is a game. Meet Tarzan and Eugene.
And as you said, there's a story in it, but the whole thing, they have this kind of afterlife which I wasn't really aware of. So the series ran until 1978, but it spawned double albums. There was a couple of double albums, and then, as is my way, I started just looking into things and doing a bit of research, and it turns out that the Kwackers used to actually gig. So they used to turn up and do live performances all around southern England. And bearing in mind, as I said, that the show ran until 1978, they were gigging until 1988. They played Hounslow's Centre Space on New Year's Eve 1988. Can you imagine seeing in 1989 in the company of the Animal Kwackers?
Well, there might be people listening who were there. Were you there?
That would be great. I think if you were there, please drop us a line and we'll give you an email address at the end of the podcast.
Well, next time we're going to go through the square window to look at TV from a very different era, 1990, including...
We're going to be looking at the launch of both Twin Peaks and the Mary Whitehouse Experience.
I might have thoughts about that.
Already?
Well, I will have thoughts about the Mary Whitehouse Experience because I've read what Mary Whitehouse thought about the Mary Whitehouse Experience. You may not know that.
And we're going to brave an episode of the cult ITV children's sword and sorcery video game show Nightmare. And it's important we say...
Nightmare with a K. I chose this show. I love this show.
So if you want to share any thoughts with us on those programmes or anything about our opening episode of Through the Square Window, please drop us a line on email at squarewindow.co.uk.
See you next time. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Oh, it's quite 70s. I just couldn't resist waving at you. Thanks for listening to Through the Square Window.
This was a Square Window production with music by local teenagers. Podcast artwork by Stuart Manning.
Do subscribe.
And tell other people about us.